Okay, so now we're going to go through our lesson planning together. I'm going to show you what my lesson plan is, and then I'm going to go through each stage using Zoom so you can see how I use the tools to achieve my aims. So my lesson aims need to start by answering these questions. And by the way, this is exactly the same document that I am linking in the YouTube video. So you can actually either print this, write in it with your pencil, or you can use this link and make a copy so that you can actually edit this in Google Drive, right? So this is a good model to show you how I can get students to do this too. So I really love Google Drive. Anyway, back to the lesson plan. Let's answer these questions. I'll tell you my lesson aims so that way you have a context for what I will be doing. So number one, what do I want my students to achieve at the end of the lesson? So I want my students to learn about thought groups. Thought groups are a pronunciation technique, a speaking technique that we can apply to every conversation we have. I want my students specifically to use intonation, pauses, and emphasis in the context of giving a TED Talk. This is a long-term semester project, and I want them to use thought group skills in their own TED Talk. That's their productive task. So what do they need to know in order to achieve this? Question 2. My students will need to know how pauses work with punctuation. They need to identify different sentence structures like questions, statements, and they need to know, do we go and have rising intonation or falling intonation according to the structures? So that's my content. Number 3, how can I check to see if my students learn what I teach them? I have some practice activities that I can do, multiple choice. I have some interactive activities where the students can speak and another student can listen, and they can check for understanding with each other. So I have some ideas up my sleeve that I can plan for. All right, I've got my aims, and now I need to plan my lesson. So let's go to this first stage, the warm-up stage, right? And I'm going to show you in Zoom exactly how I can use tools like the whiteboard, the chat box, mind mapping to engage with my students right away in the warm-up stage. Hey, so here I am in my Zoom classroom. I've decided for this one that I'm doing a meeting as opposed to a webinar. Webinars mean that you can only interact via the chat box, but meetings you have more flexibility. Also, webinars cost more money, so for me, it's not necessary. I'm not having 100 participants, so it's fewer than 30, fewer than 40 even would be okay to have a meeting. And how can I see the participants in my meeting? I can see them here, participants. They'll be arriving, and you'll see them arrive in here. You have the option to mute all, unmute all, and in the settings before the meeting, you can choose if you want them to be able to have a webcam or not. What do you think would be a disadvantage if 30 people had a webcam? Even 20 people. What would be a disadvantage? Webcams can slow down the internet for some of the users or some of the attendees. It can be distracting if there are things going on in the background, and it could take away from what you're doing. However, there are advantages, right? You can see reactions, you can use body language, and they can use body language to say that they don't understand or they can't hear you. So there are many pros and cons. So you can think about what kind of meeting do you want to have? All right. For me, I've decided a meeting, no webcams for now, everyone's on mute for now, and I'll just start and engage with them in a different way. So I have decided to make a mind map for my warmer. I want to ask my students what they remember from a previous class. How do you think I can make a mind map for them to see? What tools can I use down here? I can share my screen, and actually the whiteboard tool allows me to make a really easy mind map that everyone can see. So I'm going to share my whiteboard, and here it is. By the way, if something jumps in front of my whiteboard, like my lesson plan, the students can't see it. They can only see my whiteboard. So it's okay if you're moving screens around or anything like that. They'll only see your whiteboard. So I have my text tool here, a draw tool. I can choose my color here. So I'm going to make sure my font's nice and big, and I'm going to ask a question. What techniques do we use to add emphasis when we are giving a talk? So they already have practiced their TED Talks, they've written them, and I want to ask them, how can we emphasize certain points? So I'll ask my students, hey, let's make a mind map. What techniques do we use to add emphasis when we are giving a talk? Please write it in the chat box. So while they're writing, I'll be getting my mind map ready. And how do I check the chat box when I have my whiteboard? It's a little confusing. So one thing you can do is go more and chat, and it will pop up. You can also minimize that so that you have the chat here and the whiteboard there. So I see in the chat, ooh, good idea. You're absolutely right. We can do body language. That's a great technique. We can use stress. Absolutely. Intonation. What kind of intonation do you remember? That's right. You can do rising and falling. Perfect. Okay, well done. So today we're going to be learning a technique called a thought group to add emphasis to our TED Talks. All right, so that's the end of my warm-up, right? I have been looking at my chat box while I'm writing. It can be a little confusing, but you'll get there with practice. It's taken me a while to even just change the color. Just remember that you want to keep it simple, and having a visual is really important so that they have something to take home. What do you think I should do before I close my whiteboard? You can actually save it. And even though there's a setting where it automatically saves the whiteboard, you can engage that. But I always save it because if there's a disconnection or if you leave the meeting for some reason and when you come back to the meeting room, the whiteboard disappears. So I'm always in the habit of saving the important whiteboards to make sure that I have a copy of it. And I actually will send that image to my students. So yeah, that's my warmer.